My name is Michelle Brown. I am the mother of these five beautiful people. And I had the idea to do a family podcast, like we're talking around the dinner table, as we're sharing our hearts, as we're sharing questions, things we're learning, even things that are difficult. And so, primarily, that's what this is going to be. And I live in Utah, and we'll go let everyone introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Heather. I am the oldest, and I am in Salt Lake City. I have five daughters, and um, I just am excited to bring in this element of family dinners because I feel that I have lots of specific memories of many generations of this family having conversations, and some disruptive ones and some funny ones, and just being able to learn and grow together is around the dinner table, I feel like has been transformational in my own life. So
I'm Jared. I'm the second oldest. I live in Connecticut. I use comedy to deflect having to be vulnerable.
I'm Josh. I am located in Holiday, Utah. I am the middle child, and I think I am a very typical middle child.
Ooh, I want to talk about that because I feel like a middle child.
Me too.
I'm the baby of the family and also the wisest, but not really. But
funniest.
I also use humor to deflect. Jared and I have that in common, but I'm 31 and I live in Austin, Texas. And yeah, excited to see what happens.
She's single.
Yeah, I love that. I'm Ben. I'm the second to youngest. There's a 7-year gap between me and Josh. So I'm 33, turning 34 in a couple months. And I also live in Austin, Texas. Me and Liz are here. And we, I'm really excited to have these conversations as a family. Um, it's an important thing that not a lot of families can do, at least that I've experienced. Doesn't mean that we're perfect at it by any means. We're definitely not perfect, but we have the willingness, and I think that that's really all you need. If you have the willingness to open up, to communicate, and to open your heart in the way that we're aiming to do, to learn on the spot together, and to share it with you to hopefully help you and your family too.
We chose our first topic to center around the idea of having inherent value versus really just having the need to please, to get accepted, and attaching our value to what others think of us, which I feel like is such a common human experience. And so today we're going to talk about how that has affected us individually and as a family. And I expect my children will also share how things I've done as a mother have contributed to that in probably unhealthy ways and maybe some healthy ways. So for me, I feel like of course, a different generation and was raised by parents who would just say, this is how it is. I'm the parent, what I say goes. And so you just do what I tell you. And that was actually really challenging for me. And when I got to the age where I could see that my parents weren't perfect, then in my brain, I just made this decision, I'm questioning them because they're telling me these things, but I don't know that they really know why I should do it. And have they really, figured that out? Or they're just going by the rules. And so also a big factor in my life was because I consider myself a free spirit, but I also I do HR work for a living. So based on that, I feel like rules are important to me as far as fairness, treating people fairly, and having equal opportunity. So for me, in the school systems was really difficult because I felt very compared to have to measure up to the other children. And the teachers would say, hey, be like so and so. You should have better handwriting like them, or kick the ball like them, or sit more quietly like them. And then in the home, I was the youngest of four girls. And so also felt measured up and compared to sisters in that, this is the standard that you're going to grow up and have a hope chest and look forward to that hope chest being filled with the things you'll take with you on your marriage. And so when I had thoughts or feelings about being different than any of these expectations comparing me to other people, I felt like that was kind of rebellious to have those thoughts and feelings. But that I feel like ruled a lot of my choices throughout my life, kind of this rebelliousness against having to be like someone else. Even though I felt that and recognized that, I still, even to this day, and I'm in my 60s, feel like I need to measure up or try to be good enough because I know I am being judged and measured.
Thanks for sharing, Mom. I think
Yeah.
it's cool for all of us to just hear your perspective, because obviously the dynamic is different, and almost all of us have kids of our own, but to hear like your parents' perspective, especially how growing up, it's just helpful to see it from your perspective instead of just you're the parent. So thanks for sharing.
I heard a great phrase. I listened to an interview on a podcast with Jeff Bridges this week, and he used the term. He said, when did you realize your parents? I think he said something like, when was your feet of clay moment? When did you realize your parents had feet of clay? And he had to they asked him to clarify what that meant. He's like, when you realize like your parents are human beings. And I loved that expression, feet of clay. I mean, it was interesting to hear what they talked about that. And I mean, I was thinking about it for myself. And I honestly feel like I haven't had that. I mean, I guess I feel like I've had that a little bit with Dad, maybe. But I, like, in some ways, Mom, I guess I don't see you as, I mean, like as a human being, I guess, like as flawed, like, I mean, I know that you are, but I guess it's conflicting because I actually feel good and bad about it. I feel bad about it because I feel like I need to give you that benefit of the doubt, right? That you make mistakes. But then I also feel good about it because I also think like I'm not thinking about that very often. I'm not thinking like, oh, Mom said that just because she's human. She's human like all of us.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've had this conversation before, multiple times, and it is interesting. And then, as a parent, I thought about it from that side too. Like, what is it? What you were talking about generationally, I think that's even being stripped away because I already feel like in some ways that my kids know that I'm a human being, like that I make mistakes, because it's always been hard for me with Tessa and I's different parenting styles, that her mom wasn't like an authoritarian and talked about everything. And so Tessa's always done that with our kids, like has never tells them to do something just because I said so. And for sure, my instinct is always to say, at least, especially when they were younger, I feel like I'm growing out of it, but was to say, do this because I said so. But it's interesting because there's two parents and they're only getting that from me. They're actually confused if I say that, like they just start reasoning with me and having a conversation with me. And I'm instantly like, on my heels and like, oh, like, yeah, that's a good point. What you just said. And no, I know, like, just do it because I said it,
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
And I think it's cool to note, right, of like each generation is hopefully going to be more aware, like as our kids are, right? Like that's, and I think that even going up, right? How I've had more forgiveness going toward you, mom, and also dad. And I think it's also important for the listeners to know that our parents divorced how many years ago?
Liz was 2 and you were 4.
Okay.
Well, yeah, not quite 30, but
Yeah. So it's like, but anyway, like I've just like to piggyback on Jared too. Like it's cool to see. It's like it is a credit to you, and I also think just humans get smarter, right? Like that's the whole point of evolution. Is like now that like they're hopefully our kids are going to be smarter, more aware, more kind, and all the other things.
something Liz and I talked about yesterday on a phone call was our family. I feel, and Heather alluded to this in her introduction of herself, that there were many conversations around the dinner table, but also I feel like I came from a family who nurtured discussions and deep conversations. And my dad definitely, I think, nurtured that with my mother and with our nuclear family. And I can have deep conversations with my sisters for sure. Then for us, I feel like I continued that with my children. And even with some of your friends would be in the house and say, wow, this is so cool, that you can talk to your mom about this. And so I do want to say that as well, that I think that's part of, like Liz even said, talking to one of her friends, saying that we were going to do this together, said, what? And what did your friend say? It goes, Liz, we had like a 4-hour conversation the other day.
Yeah, I said I just talked to my mom for 4 hours, and she was like, I haven't talked to my mom for 4 hours in the last 5 years. Like in that total amount of time. And yeah, just realizing that, I mean, not everyone's family is like this, and it is, oh, I'm gonna be the first one to cry. But yeah, it's just special.
I'm so grateful for each one of you that you bring that openness, because I've had deep conversations with each one of you individually, and then we've done it collectively. And so I really look forward to us sharing this in a public way, because we do all have different beliefs religiously and politically and even individually about how our lives should be structured. And I feel like even though we have those differences as individuals and we're on, different places on the path as far as personal awareness, personal, progression, spirituality, all of those things that, are an integral part of life. But I love that we still love to be together. I mean, every year we go on a family vacation with our extended family too, your dad and his wife and their children, and I love having them there. And I've had people say, wow, that's so unusual that you can do that. Dad's wife Cindy and I have even talked about that this summer on our family trip, that she's had people say that to her. Can't believe you can go with the ex-wife, So I think that says something about even the love that we have for all of you, that because as me and your dad and Cindy, we might have different feelings toward each other, but because we love all of you and your children and your spouses and partners, we are willing to overlook some of our differences to come together and have harmony in those experiences. So there definitely is that love there. And I think that is also a key.
Yeah, I wanted to say something about that because I feel like that's such a great reflection of in the world. Like when I was talking to you, Mom, about like wanting, like we do have a lot of different beliefs, but we have similar values. But I feel like that could be said about like the larger population. Like we maybe have more similar values than we think with others. And like a lot of people want to get specific about like who you vote for or what your like specific things are, which creates this like division in our society where it's like we all have different views, but like we can still find like love for each other. And like really care about each other in a way that's like needed in this world, that's not like pinning each other against each other, right? It's like we can still like have love and compassion for others even if we're not like voting for the same person or whatever.
Some of our values, I would say, that are similar are family values. I think we all value family, as you've, shared. I feel like we all value spirituality as well, and personal progression, even if we may have different religious or even spiritual beliefs. And we all, I think, value truth, right? And truth is a relative thing. But to me, that's about learning. The more we learn, I feel like the more light and truth we can receive to understand. And I feel like that will come out in these conversations as well.
I was just wanting to like highlight the hope chest part when you talked about that. One, I wanted to say, like, I'm really glad you didn't do that for me. I think there is value in having a chest of hope or a container where you can perhaps gather values or traditions. It's just interesting to think about that tradition that I think a lot of girls specifically had, of like even putting everything they wanted to do for their wedding, right? What they wanted to name their kids, like this tradition of like what a female should be. And
Can
so
we
like
clarify what it is? What a hope chest? Because I'm like, I've never heard that before.
That chest that Grandpa made?
A cedar
Cedar.
chest.
It's
That's
like
so weird. I was just
cedar
looking
chest.
at a chest on Facebook Marketplace.
Wow.
It used to contain all of someone's hopes and dreams. So I wouldn't buy it. It's kind of like almost like a time capsule, and it is for sure just like a traditional thing. I mean, do you feel like a lot of girls your age had that, Mom? Because you're the youngest and your parents were older, that changed the generation you were in too a little bit, right?
Yeah, so my oldest sister is almost 14 years older than me, and then the next one's 9 years older, the next one's 8 years older. So there's an 8-year space.
Your dad was in World War II, which,
and my parents are both passed on. I mean, my dad would be 100, almost 101 if he were still here. So yeah, I mean, different beliefs. So no, Jared, I didn't really have friends of mine that were focused on the Hope Chest. You think about hundreds of years ago, we didn't have all the stores and we didn't have, the conditions we have now. And so this was a way to help prepare you. So if you went off and you lived, on some remote farm, right, you'd have some items to get your home established.
That's a good description. Yeah, Google says a large box designed for collecting and storing items for younger women to have when they get married later in life.
I wanted to hear more about what you were saying about that, even talking about, the physical box, but also like there would seem to be more.
The metaphorical.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, I want to share what like is coming up around that as like Mom shared that. And one thing I've been studying, I feel like I've been studying it for 8 years, but it comes back around, is the Gene Keys. And I know some of you may or may not know what that is, but it's like a form of study that includes astrology and the I Ching and human design. But this week, it goes through like a key. There's 64 keys on like a wheel, and it goes through a key every 6 days. This week is in the key of 32, which is my life purpose, which is all about preservation. The shadow is failure, and the city, which is like the highest emanation of frequency, is veneration. I bring that in because I feel like even what we're doing in these conversations, and even this first conversation about value, what do we want to preserve that we've been handed down from our ancestors? What stories, what traditions, what things do we want to preserve, and what things do we not want to like carry on and pass down to our children and to their children? And so just like when Mom referenced that, it just kind of like all these lights went off of like, I'm really grateful that even though there were some of those like traditions that I feel like I did take on from like religion and other things of what I should be as a girl. But but mom also embodied a lot of non-traditional values as a woman, owning several different businesses and just like trying and experimenting lots of things. So I feel like that's one thing I do want to put in in my metaphorical hope chest is the willingness to like fail and celebrate what we can learn from all of those, because like failure really doesn't exist if we learn something from it. And the more that we do, the more that we get to like experience life and experience different flavors and people and cultures by just being willing to try something new. I'm in that process in my personal life, even actually going through all of the physical stuff in my house for the last 20 years of like what I've collected. And as two of my older girls are moving out, I'm like, what do I want to hold on for them? And what do I want to be like, okay, what are we keeping and what are we letting go of?
I love that idea so much because I think I really just want to underline and highlight and bold the idea of we tend to always, and I've done this for sure, I want to progress, right? And so, and I think as a society, we can really be critical of some previous generational teachings. So I love what you said, Heather, about what do we want to hold on to? What do we want to value? Because I think there is a lot of values. One of them, like being hard work, integrity, community. Those are amazing values that I see from previous generations.
You really lit up, Heather, when you said that. When you said that you want to put that in your hope chest, your spirit shone through.
Well, thank you. I was feeling gratitude for mom. So
thank you. I appreciate that. And just, yeah, I feel like you're super grounded in what you're saying, which means a lot.
Heather, that was cool. I just want to acknowledge, I felt like you were really in your truth and power right there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Everyone in the family knows the story of when mom gave me a cell phone because she loves to tell the story. So, and why I like this, what I've really learned, this is cool how everything's connected with like the past and preserving and change. And one thing I've really worked on in my life is like holding both or multiple truths, right? Because it's like, obviously, people in the past want to conserve the way things are because survival and change is scary and all the things. But then the younger generations are like, no, like, we don't want that. Like, we want change. And so then it's like fighting against like who knows best and everything. But to hold both is really important. And like with my past and like my upbringing, and like with this story specifically, I like being able to hold where essentially I'm in seventh grade. I come home with a report card and it wasn't even that bad. I think I got like a 3.2 on my first report card, which is above average, which goes into inherent value. And so I remember like all my friends were like on the honor roll or high honor roll. And so I came to mom feeling dejected or disappointed or whatever. And again, we don't know the entire truth of what was in the past, but the story, how the story goes and the story I told myself from that moment, what mom did was she was just like, well, if you can get on the honor roll because my 13th birthday was coming up, that she'd give me a cell phone. And so like something just clicked in that moment and I started to apply myself. And that's how I graduated high school with like a 3.95 GPA. Like it was just all I needed was that like just like incentive and something just clicked.
Can I interject something right here?
Yeah.
So my remembering about that is that you wanted a cell phone. Some of your friends were getting cell phones. And so you came and said, I really want a cell phone. And so I said, okay, get on the honor roll. And then, but your response was, I can't do that. I'm not as smart as these guys. And I was like, what? You are absolutely every bit as capable as they are. And I do feel like that this was a pivotal moment for you, where you were pretty laid back and maybe not applying yourself fully. And that this was motivational, right? So you applied yourself and then you were like, wow. And then you continued to get straight A's all through school.
Yeah. And so it's like, So the duality, right, of this story is that like the it did teach me an amazing lesson to apply myself, which I'm grateful for. And what I also learned from that moment is that my worth, right, my value is tied to performance, to getting straight A's. Learning, it doesn't mean that it's like I can't perform, but it's knowing that like my worth and value inherently, aside from what my grades are. So like if my son were to come up with that, I would say something similar, like you can do it, you're capable, yada yada. But at the same time, I'd also just like allow him to like, how do you feel? Dude, like regardless of what your grades are, it's like I love you and I know that you can do it if you want to do it. Like, why do you even want to do it? Like, because you are feeling like you want to fit in, like is there a fear attached to that? So really like getting to the root that I'm able to with a 12-year-old, but also just allowing him to feel it and to feel love in that moment from getting a 3.2. And then, yes, go ahead, go forward and get that 4.0. So it's like, again, holding both. And that's, I know it's my responsibility to do that for myself too. And that's what I've worked on a lot over the past few years.
And I think something Ben's highlighting too about me that I would like to speak to is I think I was more of a parent, definitely more of an authoritarian, but also I would say a cheerleader and positive maybe to a fault, because I wouldn't listen to or even really want to hear like the negative, because I just felt like, no, you can do it. We can do it, because this was my own survival too, right? So
Exactly.
I got married at 16, had Heather when I was 17. So many people told me I wasn't going to be able to do it. Of course, getting divorced wasn't really in the plan, but then, when that happened, and, things, of course, change in relationships. But people even told me then, you're so stupid to get a divorce. How are you ever going to raise 5 kids on your own? And so I also didn't want to listen to the negativity of the naysayers, right? So that was part of my survival. And then when my kids would maybe be having a sad day or something, this is also how I responded to them, which was not really listening, or like Ben just said, wanting to do with his son, listen and be present in that moment and ask them, how are you feeling? I wasn't, I mean, I don't know that I even really knew about that, honestly. This is
No,
kind of evolution. Right?
exactly.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, even for myself, right? Even like as a kid, I know that's like, oh, I just wanted to be seen and to be heard, right? And listened to. But it's like the forward forgiveness for you is like you literally had no like emotional awareness, like we've come so far for that. And like again, I have the responsibility to provide that for myself. And then also like again, holding the both of like, I know that you did your best. And like you said, your survival, like what are you going to do? Like it's either basically you had two options, like be positive and survive or get eaten by negativity and not provide for your 5 kids. So it's like having that perspective is helpful.
Along this topic of value and I think for me, I didn't realize how, maybe I realized it or noticed it, but I didn't really profoundly understand that a lot of my value in a professional environment was tied to recognition and perception of those that were my superiors. Now, 38, so it's a lot of your life to like, oh, finally figure that out later on. But with that, kind of what you're talking to, Ben, is I think, there's a lot of opinions of people that have about a meritocracy, right? We live in a meritocracy, like you get what you earn. And I do think there is value in that. I think there is value as a society. I think there's value in work ethic, a lesson to be learned, and to find that balance of finding, okay, am I doing my best? And then there is a for lack of a better term, a science to cause and effect, right? Like you worked hard and you got A's. Now that doesn't change your value, but how do you communicate that? I don't know, the argument of like, no, like I am valuable, right? Like I am like, I don't know, what am I trying to ask here? How do the counter argument is saying like, no, I am worthy, I am enough. It's like, yes, you are, just by your existence, you are enough. However, there are natural laws that if you do not do certain things, you will not get certain things. And so even though you are enough,
Well, depending on lots of circumstances and where you live, and like if you live in a tropical environment, like where you can, like, you need a shelter, but food mostly grows on trees, right? Like you don't need much clothes because it's warm most of the year.
but what does that have to do with it? What are you talking about?
Well, you're talking about making a living, right? Like that you
No,
have to.
I'm just talking about like progression, right? Like people, anything that you're working towards, how do you combine the two of saying, hey, yes, you are enough, but you can always be better? How do you bring those two together in a healthy way?
Yeah, I mean that's a fantastic question, and I've wrestled with that one for a while. Um, and I think there's many different perspectives. And because again, I feel like it's like what Heather brought up, and we've been talking about of like how can you hold both, right? Of like if you look at nature, right? Nature's always expanding. Like the universe is literally expanding, right? It's infinitely expanding, which is a weird concept. As humans, as a human race and collective, as like, yes, we're always expanding and holding that truth is that like we are enough, right? But it's like to me is like what energy are we trying to like progress or achieve from? So am I achieving from fear that like if I don't do this thing, then I'm not enough, right? And then I feel like I've failed, then I feel like I don't deserve yada yada yada. Or is it coming from love? Like, yeah, I know this is what I'm supposed to do, and this is why God put me here. And like with a full heart and like knowing that I am like a gift to this world and like I'm worthy of this. Um, and doing it because it's who I am. That's why I try and approach it. And of course, I definitely don't get it perfect, but that's where my intention is like doing it because I love it and doing it because I know that's just who I am and because I want to expand and because I want to challenge myself. Um, because that's our nature, right? Even as we've already talked about like evolution and growth, but knowing that like even looking back at our ancestors or the traditions, it doesn't mean that like, oh, like you guys are so stupid. It was like you literally did what you thought was like best, right? Based on survival and even mom and her things. So it's like as we grow as humans, right? Even individually, is the fifth grader, unless you're potentially a genius, doesn't know like 12th grade math. You know what I mean? So it's the same type of thing of like we can still progress and like feeling whole as a human at the same time.
For me, I like to look at it as, of course, I look at my children and how I mothered and taught my children, and then how I now feel about my grandchildren. It's very different in my perspective, right? And of course, I don't have a full-time responsibility to teach my grandchildren. So I can mostly just be with them in a way that is more free to let them be. But I still feel like it helps me if I can just picture how I felt about all of you, as well as all of my grandchildren, when you were born. There's just this beautiful, like, feeling and experience of this pure person, this, which I believe is like an adult soul embodying this infant body, and coming into this place that's got to feel overwhelming and scary, right? So I feel like what a sacred responsibility to teach, these little ones, but also being human, we're all human, right? So as parents, we're not perfect. We get tired, we get cranky, we get annoyed. And so there's not ideal circumstances, around us. But I do love the idea of constant improvement because we are not perfect. And so there is, I feel like, a balance, like Ben said, we're wired to do that. We're wired to constantly improve unless we've totally shut that off out of fear. And at the same time, how do we balance loving ourselves, giving ourselves grace, that we're human, yes, we're going to make mistakes, because I can beat myself up really well. I'm really good at that when I don't live up to what I want. And yet also, as I would treat that little child, visualize myself as that little child learning. I mean, I believe God sees all of us that way. We're learning and we are not seeing the whole picture, right? We're kind of disabled by a lot of things, our DNA or our limited vision. And so, yes, we want to improve, but we also, I feel like that aspect of love that Ben brought up. I want to speak to one other thing Josh said, is I do feel that we can try our best to achieve something and we may not ever achieve it. Like, I would love to sing, but I just don't have that great a voice. I look at these people who perform on American Idol. I'm so inspired by that. I just go, that would be so incredible. But I just don't have that ability. So I also believe something that Ben said, we have certain gifts that we're here to share and serve. And I feel like that's so great once you can see your gifts. And then you go, oh, this feels so good. Like, focus on that.
I'm gonna push against some of that a little bit. Like, I've been thinking about Buddhism for the last couple of minutes while we've been talking. I mean, I don't know that much about Buddhism, but I guess I like it. And I think one of the main tenets of Buddhism is not needing anything. Like that's like the ultimate Zen is to transcend need. Even like the need of food, right? Like to be able to have such control over your body and mind that you can sit in one place, right? And feel content. And we're talking about lots of like dualism here, right? And competing ideas, but I guess push against like the need for constant improvement. And even the word progression, I mean, I feel like I feel the need, like the cultural need to want to improve and grow. I've always felt like I've always wanted to push against that too. Like and one thing that Josh said before, talking about, what drives us and what motivates us. I've always felt similar to Josh, that I actually haven't been very motivated by like specific accomplishments, but I have been motivated by other people's approval and wanting to be successful in the eyes of others. I think that's one thing that I'm like dealing with right now, is like I have had this kind of wonderful time this past year of having this little bit of grace period of like, I should be working, but it just the timing of everything, of moving and, just like having savings and being in a new place and kind of like reframing my business a little bit, that there's just been this time to semi-retire, like to go on long walks and go kayaking and really do things that don't even improve myself, but just feel good, like just feel good for like the soul. And it's so hard for my brain to like push to get back to that mindset that that I haven't been in a while. But like, I guess going back to, I don't know, maybe like 10 years ago when I felt really driven, when it came to like business and money and and was doing really well in those regards and was just going after that. like know that I need money to a certain extent and need like a certain amount of success, but also just desperately, I want to not want, like not need those things.
You
I
could go live on that tropical island you just talked about, where you
Yeah.
don't need as much.
Right, and I don't want to do that. It's balance, right? It's finding that beautiful harmony in the middle where you can not quite work, right? Like kind of almost, manifest what you want. Like I am in a pretty good place where it's like I have one really solid client, that like I get a chunk of money from every year, but it's not quite enough to cover the the lifestyle that I want to have. And so but I'm also just not driven enough to like go and find similar clients. Like it's just that type of work isn't engaging enough to me to really want to go after it. And there are things that I am motivated by, but it's like I kind of it's a slower road to those. So it's an interesting place to be. But I guess it's funny because I just certainly don't know the answer, but I just at this point in my life I really reject the idea of the need for constant progression or in a material way.
Yeah, I can understand
For
that.
sure. Yeah. I mean, I think, the things, right? Things and the acquisition of things doesn't matter, right? I think the progression of your gifts and the progression of things that are important to you they have a natural progression, but there's also a progression that I think takes an intent and a focus to develop. What you're describing to me, Jared, of this time that you've had, I went through a similar time, and I would say like the first year was awesome. The first year was like, oh man, I got to just breathe, and have some stress relieved and just be present with the family. And I think that's something that I learned a few years ago, when I got fired and had my first bout of unemployment, as I really felt like presence with Jones, and I could play with him and I wasn't worried about emails. I wasn't worried about performance. I was just like, man, oh, this is what it's like to be present. And so that I still know that, like, really, like when I am my happiest, it's because I'm not thinking about anything else, right? Kind of to go to your Buddhism of that kind of just state of being is like to live in the present, to not have worries or fears or doubts or anxieties of anything else beyond what is happening in that singular moment. That is when I'm the happiest. For example, like when you asked me, Mom, you asked me how's your fall break been? My first reaction is like, oh, like I was looking forward to some time off, and and I think this week I've just had I had so much planned to get done, work around the house, and I've been in a bad mood, I think, for most of the time, like for 3 days, because I knew rain was coming and I knew I had a deadline. I knew I wasn't going to get everything done that I wanted to. And so anything else that interrupted me, like I had all this thought that what was going to happen in my limited time. And so I wasn't even enjoying the process of what I was doing. And I even felt anxiety like in my chest, like, oh, I'm running behind. I'm against this clock. I have limited time. And so like when in reality I should have just been like, no, like this is time off. Be present with what you're doing. Don't get irritated by distractions. I mean, Jared, just to your point of like being present that's really happiness. And so I think I'm going to go back to what I was talking about is that first year. So that first year was awesome. I felt like I really had some presence. The second year was not awesome. The second year was more of like, okay, now I really got to do something, right? Like, I can't live like this. And just because, not for the need to progress, but the need to survive, right? Like, Jared, what you said, like have a lifestyle that you want. And I don't see it, and I would say our lifestyle has drastically changed Just we don't spend frivolously. I mean, we still live in a nice house and we have drive nice cars, and sure, like I miss some other things sometimes, but like we live comfortably. And so like that second year for me was a little bit more stressful in a sense of I didn't feel like I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. And so it was difficult for me to find joy in the present because I felt that I was missing something or that I wasn't doing something that I was supposed to be doing. I don't, and I don't know if that is a sense of value. And I think there is. I think there is a sense of value, like, oh, I'm not earning money. And there for sure is value tied to that in a, call it a patriarchal society, right? Or a patriarchal position that I am in of a provider. And, I feel that pressure, but I also have that desire to be that. And the flexibility to to say like, oh, that's not up to me now. It's kind of it's kind of a team approach. And so like there's all these things that are going through my head. And that second year for me was much different than the first year. And that, now that I'm at the end of it and that I'm doing something that I enjoy, the money isn't there, right? Like that's different. And so to round it out, I am progressing in a different way. I'm not progressing financially or materialistically, but I am progressing in something that I feel I have a gift for. And being a kindergarten teacher has been the only way I can describe it is it has been a spiritual experience that I have felt, I've felt full. I have felt just so much love. I have felt all these things that I didn't expect to feel. Like I thought I would enjoy it. But it is definitely a spiritual fulfillment that I was not expecting. Kind of just to bring it all back to value is like that little journey of wanting the presence, being able to be present, but having to balance financial needs. And okay, this is what I've always wanted. I don't know if I want to do this, but my progression, all these other things of where my value is. And I still battle that a little bit with teaching of like, I want to be the best teacher, right? I want to be compared to others and I want people to know that I'm better than like, as a teacher. But it's always this self-talk, like, no, that doesn't matter, right? Like, I just need to be the best I am because I have the ability to be good and be great. And then also because I think a few things, right? To fulfill the gift that I have, to be great at it. And then also to do it for the kids that I have, in my view, a sacred responsibility to. And so like, I have to bring it back to that. I always have to think, no, it's not about my score as my evaluation. Yes, I am competitive in nature, which is okay, that I want to be better, but it's also continuing to have that self-talk of like, I wanted that score is I'm compared to others and I want to see my score go higher, but I have to remember this only score that I'm really measuring it against is my own and saying, is that getting better for me? And there's always going to be a little part of me that's going to want people to see that mine is getting better and better than others, but I'm aware of it. And, I'm aware that it doesn't matter, but I'm also aware that it does kind of matter to me. In this, and you live in this limbo of just trying to use it to your strength.
Thanks for sharing, Josh. That was cool. Because then
I'd love to hear more about the like spiritual experience of teaching kindergarten, maybe at like some other point. I feel like, just all of our journeys, even in business and our purpose, right? I feel like are super unique. So maybe at some point that's like a whole other thing where we can, because I feel like we do have these like unique gifts that like we've shared in lots of different ways. But I think being the oldest, I feel like I've gotten to see like in many ways, like each of like your gifts come out and be shared in many ways. And for sure, Josh, like kids, like, I'll originally, you wanting to be a doctor and like work with kids. I think like it's just cool to see how this, has evolved from like you just being a great father and getting to experience that presence and now bringing that into like a classroom and having spent lots of time in classrooms myself, knowing the gift that presence is, I think it's like one of the greatest gifts to give children for sure. So I think the way that gets to ripple out, I'm sure you may not even see it, in this lifetime, but like it is rippling out already. So yay, Josh.
Thanks, Heather. Yeah, I mean, even as we've been talking about value, I would think like you say how the presence is the greatest gift that you can give kids. You said something like that. That wasn't exactly like that, but like that's true, right? Like I think if we think of every time that we're angry with our own children, it's because we're thinking about something else, right? It's because we want to be doing something else, or I have something else planned, or I have something else I want to do. Like that's usually it. But if you really do just sit in the moment and are only focused on what they're going through, what they're thinking, what they've got, like you won't get angry. I'm asking this question in my head: is that does value even matter in the present? Right? Like does my value matter, or like is value even a concept in a present moment?
That's a great question.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, I would say no. That's just my first, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's my thought too, right? It's like
Mhm.
like personal value in a present moment, right? My initial reaction is that same, Heather, like, no, it doesn't matter.
Thinking
Oh.
about it. You're not even thinking
Exactly.
about anything. Really. You're not like in your mind, you're
Yeah.
not in that process of like you are literally just present. And I think value, yeah, that's just so interesting to think about that and how, because I would say like a lot of my value also comes from like the outer world or like what people think of me. So when I'm not that and I am present, yeah, that's not even a concept that's like coming to me. I am just present with me right now. And so, yeah, I love that. We can focus a lot on the mind and like what's happening outside of us and even what is valued, because I had a similar feeling of, taking a year off work and towards the end, just feeling like, what am I even doing? Like, what is my life? And because I wasn't doing anything that was seen as valuable in the world of like, I don't have this physical thing that I'm working on. Like, I'm not in school to get a degree, or I'm not in this. It's not like this physical thing that I'm doing but like lots of things are happening within me. It's like this feeling of when I'm really present with what's happening within me and just like this experience right now, I'm not worried about like the value that I'm bringing to society because I literally just am by just being.
Just had a little
Amen.
epiphany. You're saying that same thing that Josh and I said about pulling value from how others perceive us, that's not a true statement, that assigning value or feeling value based on our perception of other people's perception.
That's so good.
Very true.
Yeah.
Like most of the time, other people aren't thinking about you, right?
I think I had that some similar realization as I pondered about this before. Like, oh yeah, my worry, anytime I've been stressed or worried in a job of how I've been perceived, is my own self-doubt because I don't think I'm doing what they think I'm supposed to be doing. And I never ask them, right? It's my own definition of, oh, I think I'm supposed to be doing this and I'm not doing it as well as I'm supposed to be doing it. So they must think I'm not doing it as well when they probably don't even think about it. And so it's like, it was all like my own self-doubt
That you're
about
projecting. Yeah.
that I'm projecting. Yeah. And so it's right. It's like remembering that of like, yeah, you're still, if I could have gone back and flipped that years ago, like, no, like these are your own self-doubts. Like if you're worried about XYZ, fix XYZ. don't worry about what they think.
Because I mean, there are people that I look to that I like have certain ideas of or like view them as successful or whatever, right? So it's like, of course, we all have perception, but it's about like, yeah, acknowledging what you just said of that like self-worth piece of, yeah, like I understand that we're all having different perceptions of each other. I consider myself intuitive, so I like to think I can like read, and I feel like I can, that's like one of my gifts of like reading energy, but it still doesn't mean that I know all of the different things that like have led to this person to this moment and all of the different variations of their life and the way that that expresses through them.
Like, as you think about your value, right, and being who you are, being in the present, and like what you guys were just talking about, when we're projecting our worries and self-doubts on someone else and what they think about us, we're really not grounded in our authenticity. So can you speak to that?
I feel like authenticity is a little bit of a trigger word for me for some reason, because it's like it's also become very popular lately of like just be authentic. Like it just sounds like a like thing to check off your to-do list or something. It really comes down to being present. And it's impossible to be present all the time, it feels. Like maybe there are some humans out there, like two, you know, that are awakened and can, but just working on, I think, kind of releasing those beliefs and just understanding ourselves. And it's like we spend our whole lives learning how to do that. Mom, you sent me some emails like a while back. I don't know if you remember, where it was like you were sending Josh emails about like updates while he was on his mission. So I would have been 10. And it was like you were just kind of highlighting what was going on in everybody's life. And there were like some things in there that I was like, is that really like how you perceived me as a child? And then it's like, oh, how did I get so far from that?
And what was I saying about you?
I don't know that I was ready to talk about this. But yeah, it was just like you were saying like how I was a leader and how like I just like knew what I wanted and I did it. And like even just like the story of me crawling out of my crib or like just doing things where I'm like, holy shit, I just did the damn thing. Like I just like did what I wanted. And I'm like, hey, I want that again. Like I don't want to be like so worried about people and like what they think. And I feel like I've been like kind of processing this a lot the last few months, even of like, I mean, that is who I am. Like that childhood version of myself. I mean, I even put like a child photo on my Hinge just to remind them of who they're talking to. You know, like I am this version of myself. Like, speak to me kindly, you know, like and like I want to see that in myself too, of like, there is this essence to us. And like, I think part of our journey is like, for me, it feels important that I did kind of stray from that in a way, that it's like part of my purpose here is also like getting back to that, like the journey of becoming that again. Like for what, I don't know exactly for what purpose, but like to find that and like be that moving forward. And it's like a constant learning process and a journey. And it feels like I'm just in the midst of it, but it also feels like so important to like find those parts of ourselves and just be. And it's that simple, just being present.
Love that. And the remembering, right? Like picturing that newborn baby, right? Like you live near Ben and Belle and you see Kingston and you can picture him, right? As this pure being, just being, right? He's being his authentic self.
Yes.
But unfortunately, what happens is the world, right? And it's part of the plan, We go through these experiences to have opportunities to remember who we are. And we get caught up in other ideas. And I think that's part of it. It gives us compassion for each other. But I love I love that you are connecting with that again, Liz, because that's what I want for all of us, right? To remember and to reconnect with that part of us, because I think that's part of being a part of the world, right? We come here and we feel so safe in the initial entry. Hopefully most children get that. But then there's all these distractions that pull us into forgetting that. And I think it's very true that part of the purpose of life is remembering and reconnecting.
I love just picturing you going out the doggy door. Like, it's just like, all right, Liz, it's time. You're going out the doggy door. You're
Yeah,
coming out.
I wasn't afraid of what was on the other side of that doggy door. I just went and I was ready.
And just for context, for people listening to this, is Liz at 18 months could climb out of her crib and get out of her room, and I would think she's safely sleeping in her bed at nap time. And then when I would go to check on her, she was nowhere to be seen, which, as you can imagine, is very frightening as a parent. But then I learned quickly she would follow the dog Friskers. She'd get out of her room, and then Friskers, would go out the doggy door, and there she would go. And at the time, we lived in this place with this big backyard that was wooded, and fortunately, she stayed in that area. But yeah, she would escape.
You can't fence me in.
I would love to hear everyone's kind of perspective on that. Like, maybe, just to close, of like just a little overview of what you think that like childhood essence of yours is like.
Good question, Liz.
Beautiful.
That's a cool way to end it. Ooh, I love that. That is a fun, even just like journaling, you know?
I wanted to be free and adventurous, and that's always been something that I have valued, and I've always been like that. And it's just nice to remember that oh yeah, this same feeling that I have now, it's not, even though it can be labeled as like irresponsible or maybe like running away from things or something, like there is a certain aspect to me. Like, of course, that's a harmonious version of that, where it's like it can be used to run away from things for sure, but it's like balancing that and like honoring that is me. And like, yeah.
I mean, I'd like to share, I can do this briefly, what I saw in each of you. And I feel like that's also part of what I tried to nurture, because I never wanted you all to be the same. I saw your individuality. And Jared, as you spoke, I immediately thought about you being that child that was such a peacemaker, and always, concerned about wanting to make sure everybody was okay. And at a very young age, making a comment that when I was in heaven, I knew what the most important thing was. And it's how we treat each other. And I can still see that in you today. And then I look at Liz, and I definitely remember this child who, of course, I see her loving Grandpa Brown, loving her daddy, like being really drawn to those men in her life, and to her older brothers. But definitely, I told Liz the other day, even this picture of her that I've kept, that I really treasure of her. Because it shows there's something about this picture. She's sitting on this ski lift. She was actually on a field trip, and she was on this ski lift by herself. And someone captured this picture of her, and she didn't seem sad that she was by herself, which is kind of my initial thought as a mother. But she just had this blissful look on her face, just looking at the trees as she's riding up that ski lift. And to me, that embodies Liz, as she loves animals. She loves just being herself, being free, being in nature. She is very sensitive. She loves, I think, connecting with those deep feelings of even just being intuitive with herself and with others, which can be very vulnerable and scary. And so I think sometimes that's why we hide from that, when we have those deep feelings. And Ben, I'm just going across the line. Ben, I from a very young age. I feel like Ben and Jared were the best sleepers. They could just really get into a restful sleep and put themselves to sleep easily. And Ben just was always very
Still got it, baby.
you can both still fall asleep very easily. Yeah. But for Ben, I had just always had this soulful, very peaceful feeling about him. And Josh, I used to write these journal comments, right? And over as I read those journal comments and what I wrote about Josh, always smiling, love to have fun, funny, but the most smiling kid. That was Josh as a child. And for Heather, as the oldest child, she was so strong-willed as a child that for a 17-year-old young mother, I just remember saying to Grandma, I don't know how to do this, And I think that Heather needed that to come in to a mother who didn't know, right? She needed that to come in and say, no, this is me. And I feel like it's so interesting to look at all of your strengths and how I can even see as I'm saying this, how maybe they've gotten lost in other things over the years, and that it is a remembering, but it's also part of the journey. So not to beat ourselves up about that, but to recognize it's part of the journey. We came in with these gifts, and then it's remembering, coming back and honoring them.
Thanks, Mom. That's cool. Mhm.
Yeah, thank you.
I would love to try and connect with that, because that is interesting to compare your perspective of us as a child and then kind of our own. I mean, I think it's hard to, you don't really understand yourself as a child. And so that's interesting to think of. What the first thing that I said when I thought of when you thought of that is, I thought of this picture. I'll have to find it and send it to you guys, of me and Josh in the waves. I think probably in Florida, so like now we're like 12 and 10 or something like that, and just joyful. And I mean, you mentioned that a few times, Mom, and I think that is kind of the thing that's so easy to lose as an adult, is like that, like simple jubilation. Children are so resilient, and I guess I'm just talking about the general nature of kids, but that pure joy of holding a balloon or playing in the waves,
Yeah, I love
Back
that.
to presence, man. It's back
Yeah.
to being present.
What if, the purpose of life is to live well, and, even defining like what that is, which I think is about presence, but like maybe it's not one actual thing. It's just like bringing out that like inner world, or that innocence, like into like the field of like all of these other fields of humans and nature to experience it.
Nether, I think, and as our definitions of God are probably different, but, similar in some aspects. Like that's where I think, religiously you say like there's no beginning, there's no end. To God, there is no time. That's because God is present. It's just present. He understands. I mean, he understands way more than he or they, whatever your belief is. But like, I do think we are here to learn presence. I mean, a lot of other things, but I do think that is part of the growth of our spirits, and physical nature is nothing more important than this moment right now.
The only time we have any power.
Yeah.
Yeah, Heather, thank you for that. What that brought for me was that life is supposed to be a fully lived experience, which can feel exciting and joyful to think of it that way. Carpe diem, seize the day, live a full life experience. And that full life experience is highs and lows, right? Happiness and sadness, joy and sorrow, love and loss. It's all of it. When I die, I want to say I squoze out every single moment of experiences that I could possibly have. And I hope that I got the meaning of real love and true joy.
Amen.
Amen.
Man, and that's a valuable life. Cha-ching.
Yes.